this morning how to concentrate. I got thinking about that coming up in the train, and I just couldn't get anywhere. Showing that it's a problem. Well, then I said, now listen, this won't go on. You've got to tell them something about how to do it. And then I realized that the greatest thing to aid us in concentration is to realize that the presence of God is in us as consciousness and energy. And that presence, the power of that presence, is unlimited if we can but somehow join our seemingly limited powers of concentration with the one eternal power of God within us. Then we surely can concentrate. First, what is the definition of concentration? It means, according to the dictionary, to converge toward a center. We say, of course, to one point thing. To converge toward a center. To intensify. If your forces are scattered, of course the power is scattered. If your forces are intensified toward one point, then the power is intensified. And so it is with concentration. Concentration is that power or that ability to gather our forces together, one point them, that we are able to use the extreme power which lies behind our consciousness and energy. We take the forces of nature. We have good examples there. We take the electromagnetic forces of nature, and they are quite quiet and unobserved until you see that great streak of lightning. Then the power is concentrated. That tremendous power is brought together in one point with tremendous force. We have the same thing in an ordinary generator. The magnetic power is there all surrounding the generator, but when it unifies it, intensifies it, gathers it together in one place, so to speak, through its power as a generator, then we light cities and we perform all sorts of things by that concentrated power. Take the power, water power, for instance. Things that come to my mind, the power of the mighty ocean. It just seems to travel along, but when you obstruct it, or when you gather it together, then you have extreme force. There is a place down in Nova Scotia, perhaps some of you know Nova Scotia. There's a place called the Bay of Fundy, and that great power of the ocean is gathered together and directed up into this narrow bay, and what happens? They have a tide of 60 feet there. Tremendous power. Because that power of the ocean is gathered together and directed, intensified. Likewise with rivers. The one that comes to my mind is Boulder Dam, where that power of the Colorado River is gathered together in that Lake Mead. And then it is intensified, directed through those various channels, producing wonderful results. So do we. We must intensify the power within us, gather it together, and through concentration direct it as we would have it directed. With our forces are scattered. We must gather them together, direct them, so that we can bore in through the spiritual eye of which we have spoken at the Christ Center. Bore in through into the soul within, which is found within us, in the spinal region and the thousand-rayed lotus of the brain. We must gather our forces that we may concentrate them, one point them, that we have enough power to supersede this outward worldly diffused consciousness with the one eternal consciousness, the presence of God within us, in the spine and in the brain. We have that power, because we are God's children made in His image. Now let us take a practical illustration For instance, about concentration. You take a magnifying glass, of which you are familiar. And what do you do with that magnifying glass? You concentrate your one point, you intensify the heat rays of the sun. Now, those rays, under ordinary conditions, as we have today, or even in the desert, that's not too unbearable. But when you concentrate it together, concentrate those rays like you do in the magnifying glass through the center of the magnifying glass, you produce tremendous heat. Why? Because you've gathered those scattered rays, concentrated them, and one-pointed them with the resulting power, that you can burn things, and you all know the effect of the concentrated heat rays of the sun through the ordinary magnifying glass. I was reading in the paper just the other day that they have a solar furnace. The Air Force has a solar furnace somewhere out in New Mexico, I believe, where they concentrate by a system of mirrors. Imagine it. The rays of the sun, the heat rays of the sun, to such an extent that they produce a temperature of between 7,000 and 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I looked. I thought that was 700. 7,000 to 8,000 degrees. Talk about Hades. We don't have to go there. Go to New Mexico. Imagine. Why? Why can they do it? Because the whole power of the sun is behind it. Do you see? And so behind that magnifying glass is the whole power of the sun. We utilize just a little of it. Now, friends, so with us. So with us, the whole power of the presence of God as cosmic consciousness and cosmic energy is behind us, just as the whole power of the sun is behind the magnifying glass and that system of mirrors of which I have spoken. So you can see we have the power, if we will but utilize it, to bore through the spiritual eye here and know the soul within. Realize, as behind the magnifying glass is the whole power of the sun, so behind you, behind me, behind every child of God, is the whole power of cosmic consciousness plus cosmic energy. If you will but utilize it, if you will gather together that presence of God within you, you can realize, as the scriptures say, if God is with you, who can be against you? Jesus knew that, for he said words to the effect, the power of God is behind me, the whole power of cosmic energy and cosmic consciousness of God, so that I could, if I wanted to, gather together 12 legions of angels of power to destroy you or anyone else, which is right. The Master has done it on certain occasions. I remember one occasion somebody went against him. He stood it as long as he could, and he said, now, if you keep on, God will take care of you. And God did take care of that particular person, because the Master had the power of God behind him, and when God said, it's all right, then that power worked. And so have we, that same power behind us. If we can gather together the presence of God in us, it has been said right this morning from the pulpit, Master has said, God's omniscience is our omniscience. God's power is our power. God's consciousness is in us. If we can gather it together, corral it, so to speak, intensify it, direct it, one-point it, why should we fear anybody or fear anything? That's what we have to do with our concentration. And remember, and in any line of endeavor, business or any artistry, any profession, success depends on the power of concentration. How much more so if you are to know God? The science of all sciences. But you can do it because you have His power right with you. We have to learn how to do it. Going on just a bit now. Let us realize this one thing, an interesting simile, which I hope you'll never forget. It'll help you in your concentration. It is this. As the greatest power of the magnifying glass lies where? In the center. In the center of the magnifying glass. Why? Because in that center is the epitome of all the sun's heat rays. So, in the center of the spiritual eye within you, the single eye, in the center of it, lies the supreme power of God's presence, which has made all things, universe upon universe, world upon world. Because in the center of that spiritual lens, the spiritual eye, so to speak, in the little star in the center, is the epitome of cosmic consciousness and cosmic energy. All there is to be, all the power, all the intelligence of God is in the center of that lens, just like the power of the sun is in the center of the magnifying glass. Isn't that wonderful? To realize that. And so I often wondered why the Master used to keep telling me, when I'd get impatient about not seeing all this and all that, phenomena and all that, he said, never mind that. That light which you see is God Himself. Now, he said, concentrate on the center of that light, steadily. It's the steadily that's difficult. To keep steady is very difficult. Try it. You all have tried it. In comes all manner of thoughts and emotions, all sorts of things, to keep you from steadily looking in the center of the lens of the spiritual eye. That's where the concentration is. That's where the power of your concentration is. And when you are able to do it by following self-realization fellowship technique of concentration, and you are able to steadily look in the center of the spiritual light at this point, then you'll be able to bore through your spiritual eye into the deep find within, contact the presence of your soul and God within you in the spinal centers and in the thousand-rayed lotus of the brain, and then by the grace of God and the Guru you will be able to penetrate the inner door into the great cosmic light of the presence of God. How? By the power of concentration. Because God's power is behind you. Realize that. Realize that. We get scared. We get frightened. We are stopped. By what? Delusion. The idea that we can't do it. We must realize God is with us, and we can do it, because we are made in His image, and we have His power, His intelligence, His omniscience. Now comes the question, how? How to concentrate? Well, in self-realization fellowship, we have it. It's called, we might call it HT of C. Everything is ACTH and all sorts of things. SEBUT and all that. All right, self-SRF, HT of C. Highest technique of concentration. Remember that now. It's too long to say it all out. HT of T. Well, now comes the point. Why is that the highest technique of concentration? Remember our subject this morning, how to concentrate. How to concentrate means how to concentrate to the greatest degree. And to concentrate to the greatest degree, you have to control the life force in the body, plus the consciousness. Remember, the presence of God in us is life force plus consciousness. The life force in us is cosmic energy. That's what's hard to understand. And the consciousness in us is cosmic consciousness. Life force is consciousness within us vibrating at a higher rate, that's all. and life force within us, vibrating at the highest rate, is cosmic consciousness. By concentration, we have to increase the rate of vibration until it is the same as cosmic consciousness, or the Holy Ghost, or the Great Comforter, which is the Word or the presence of God. Isn't that wonderful? And just like you raise the vibration to a high degree by trapping the rays of the sun in the magnifying glass, so you do the same thing by utilizing the power of God behind all things as it passes through the lens of the spiritual eye. But it has to be concentrated. If it's diffused, you do not get the result. Realize that the power of God Himself as cosmic energy and consciousness is in you. And if you can utilize it, one-point it, then you have back of you, in everything you do, God's supreme power. It's difficult to realize it because God has suggested this universe with all its paradoxes and limitations and its transient consciousness. Such is truth, or the Scriptures say so. I say ye are children of God made in His image. I say ye are God's, children of the Most High. How could that be said unless it is a reality that God's omniscience is our omniscience? Now, about this concentration. Just a few things. I cannot go into it too much because the time is becoming short. But the first thing is position. And when you concentrate, people say, oh, I get along wonderfully well with my concentration. I say, how do you do it? I lay perfectly flat. And I say, you have the most automatic concentration that ever was, which is known as sleep. But what good is it? You're unconscious. So I've drawn in my notes a little picture with a little up here and then long like that. Those are the feet. This is the body. But that's wrong, naturally. That's wrong, supremely wrong. But the right way is to sit up straight, of course, as you know. It tells you right in the preceptor, and all of those teachers who teach it tell you, but still you lay flat. Why? Because ages you've been laying flat. Going to sleep, automatically concentrating. It's easy. But you do not get the result. So the first thing is position, and the right position is with the spine straight, that's all. On a chair, cross-legged if you can, in the lotus posture, but the spine, as Patanjali says, must be straight. Any comfortable position with the spine straight is right for concentration. So much for the position. Now the object of concentration is, as I have said this morning, to gather together your scattered forces. Just think. The force and the power in a little atom of your flesh. Well, you've read all about how much energy is stored in an atom. What's the matter? Our forces are distributed. They are not one-pointed. And so concentration, the object of concentration, is to gather together our forces which are scattered throughout our being and one-point them that we are able to utilize the greatest force possible by that energy within us. And what is that energy? God's presence. So now I hope that concentration is taking on a different aspect to you. Realize that when you start to concentrate, whether it be on doing your highest technique of concentration or any of the techniques of self-realization fellowship, realize that you have the power of God behind you, which is true. And if you realize that, you'll be able to concentrate much better. And that is not just my say-so. That is a fact. That is true. God's power is in us. His consciousness and His energy is in us. And we have behind us the energy of the universe, God Himself. So much for the object of concentration. Realize to gather your forces and put them on one thing. One thing. Now, if it's on business, you'll be a success in business. If it's on any other thing that you can think of, playing the organ, you must be able to concentrate, then you'll be a success. But I think we are interested here more on putting our energy on God, are we not? Why? Because if we have Him, we have everything. Greatest of all, God is ever-conscious, blissful, eternal existence. That's what we want. No matter how we get it, we must have that bliss of God. Now we come to, what are the enemies? What are the enemies? What are those things which prevent us from concentrating? I don't think I have to ask you too often. You all know. As you sit to meditate, we find the sensations come and the kinks come, and if you've had rheumatism, you don't forget it. And if the chair is hard, my. Those are the first thing, sensations. Then we get nicely seated and everything is comfortable. Then we don't have any peace because the next enemy comes, thought. Uncontrolled thoughts from sensation. Just like that sound you hear that youngster outside coming in. So we get him settled. I don't hear him now. Then the memory thoughts. 2 years ago, and if it happens to be your anniversary, watch out. Get it fixed. Those are called memory thoughts. Those are the three things. Not only memory thoughts, but memory deep desires, which we bring over. The desire body is made of all those things. Those are the enemy. And now that we know them, we can combat them. Realize that's all the trouble with you. If your mind is running this way and that way, it's those three things are bothering you. So attack them, do away with them. The greatest way is to realize the presence of God in you. We will come to that after a minute. Now there are 4 factors in concentration. This is very important. I will not go into it deeply, but just to say the 4 factors are consciousness, which is all we are. A bundle of consciousness. A bundle of energy with the consciousness that goes with it. Consciousness plus heartbeat plus breath plus life force, and life force is the key. Because life force stimulates your heartbeat, your breath, all things, your sensations, even thought is life force. Do you realize that? Vibrating at a real high rate. Consciousness is, why not thought? So those are the 4 factors. Consciousness, which constitutes what you are. A matter of consciousness, that's all. Heartbeat, because heartbeat has to do with breath. Breath, because breath keeps us tied to the body. We're concentrating deeply. Have to take a breath, and down we come into the body. These are simple facts. Finally, life force, because life force, without life force, you cannot feel anything, you cannot hear. Nothing can happen. Breath will stop, heartbeat will stop when the life force is regulated. And so life force is very important. Now you remember in concentration, I said concentration means gathering together and one pointing your forces. Now the great yogis found that the trouble was that all activity gave off carbon in the blood. Carbon in the blood. And as long as there is carbon in the blood, you have to breathe to get rid of it. And remember I told you breath ties you to the body. We have all sorts of metabolism tests. Some of you have taken them. And they know how much carbon dioxide is being given off. They know how much carbon is in your blood. So the yogis said, if we can regulate the carbon in the blood, we will not have to breathe so much. Perhaps we can go within, through the spiritual eye, contact God within, His great presence in our soul. And so they devised this highest technique of concentration, of self-realization, fellowship, which controls the life force and thereby controls the carbon in the blood. That's the whole key to concentration, is to keep carbon forming in the blood. When it forms, you have to breathe to get rid of it. So the yogi said, we will do what? We will one-point the mind by the simple technique of self-realization fellowship, which many of you know. Those of you who do not know, join the work, find out. Now, by doing that, what happens? They one-point the mind and less carbon goes into the blood. Therefore, the heart does not have to pump so much. When the baby is born, what happens? The circulation of the mother is cut off. Its little metabolism goes on. Carbon empties into his blood. And the pressure is built up in the lungs. And if he doesn't have to be slapped in the abdomen, the baby takes the first breath, due to the pressure in the lungs by the heartbeat. So the yogis reversed it. They said if we can keep the carbon out of the blood, we will not have to, the heart will not have to pump, there'll be no pressure on the lungs, and the breath will slow down. When we can slow down the breath, we can gather together our forces, life force in the body, from sensation, thought, from the different internal organs, from the heart itself, and from the breath and lungs. And then, with that gathered together life force, corral life force, we can penetrate in through the spiritual eye into the seat of the soul, the spine within. And then we can awaken the kundalini at the base of the spine, which is the presence of God in us, in static form. We can arouse it by that extra life force, that power which we have accumulated, reinforced by God's power. We can arouse the kundalini, and that in turn will rise up, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness. He aroused the kundalini, and it arose up in the wilderness within, the darkness within. When that happens, the centers of the spine, where God's spiritual consciousness resides, are awakened. And finally, the great thousand-rayed lotus is awakened, where God and His angels dwell. Now do you see why you should concentrate? Because then you will realize you are not this body. The breath will have ceased. The heart will have slowed down. Sensations will not be bothering you. And you will realize yourself not as this body, but as the great consciousness and energy of God in you, as your soul and the presence of God. That's what concentration will do. And that's the method, in a very few words. Realize life force is the key. Without life force, I couldn't feel. Without life force, you couldn't hear me. You couldn't see. You can't do anything without life force. Spoken of in the Bible as bread and water and many things. It means consciousness and energy. And they go together. So the yogis said, if we can withdraw the life force from the senses, thought, heart, lungs, and accumulate it first in the sympathetic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, if we can do that, consciousness will go along with it. We do it in sleep, but we do it unconsciously. We have to do it consciously by the power of concentration. Having gathered life force, which is the presence of God in us, from the senses and internal organs, accumulated in the sympathetic nervous system, then what happens? Then it is lifted by the techniques of self-realization to the Christ center at this point. And then, by the power of that accumulated life force, we penetrate, that's all. We pass through into this deep spine where we really live, where the soul is. And then, as I have said, arousing the kundalini, the presence of God at the base of the spine. That comes up, according to spiritual law, arouses the spiritual consciousness at the 7 gates, 6 gates, plus the one great gate in the thousand-rayed lotus. Then we realize what we truly are. And then, by the help of Guru and the grace of God, that has to come in the end. We can penetrate through the door which leads, not to the spiritual body, this door, but to the great omniscience of God, the great light, the one Holy Ghost, Divine Mother, in which is God's intelligence. Cosmic consciousness plus cosmic energy. I have one reference which I think I'll take time to give you, so as to show you that these things are spoken of in our Bible, where we read as follows in Zechariah. Zechariah, 4th chapter, 12th and 14th verses. Now I told you, by concentration, a very scientific thing. You first gather together the life force within you, which is distributed through sensation, thoughts, memory thoughts, through the internal organs, and through every action you do is done by life force. In meditation, following the highest technique of concentration of self-realization, you gather that energy first in the sympathetic nervous system, which is outside the spine. Then it rises, due to your power of will and God behind you, to this point. And then through the techniques of self-realization, you know how to direct it through here into the deep spine within. That's where you contact what you really are, a soul, a child of God. And finally, by His grace, you're not limited to the little astral body, but you can, by concentrated effort, pass through the one door to the great heavenly home which is yours and mine and everyone. Cosmic consciousness, Divine Mother, not in imagination. These things are real. You will know them if you follow the Master's highest technique of concentration and the further techniques of self-realization fellowship. Now it says just that right here, of gathering first the life force in the superficial nervous system. You wouldn't think it would be in the Bible. It is. Then it tells about emptying it in through here into the deep spine. In Zechariah, the 4th chapter, the 12th verse, I said unto the angel, what be these two olive branches which through the two golden pipes empty the golden oil out of themselves? A little ahead in this same reference, in the 3rd verse, it says, what be these two olive trees, one on the right side and the other on the left side of the golden candlestick? The golden candlestick is the spine. The olive trees are the right ganglia and left ganglia of the sympathetic nervous system. So it says, what are these things which empty the golden oil out of themselves? The Sanskrit word for oil and energy is the same. And so we gather in the two olive trees, which is the sympathetic nervous system, the golden spiritual oil, spiritual energy and consciousness, and empty it out of themselves into the deep spine. So there are just a few words you have in Zechariah. Words which corroborate the technique, the highest technique of concentration, of self-realization fellowship. There are many things of breath control, but realize the highest technique of concentration has nothing to do with the breath, except as the life force is controlled, the breath slows down. There is no holding of the breath, which is wrong. There is control of life force. Life force is the key, because God is made up of two things, consciousness plus energy. And so in us is life force, energy, plus God's consciousness. And so finally, in conclusion, realize that by the power of concentration, you can realize that you are not this little body subject to the whims of environment, habit, and latent impulses. You are not victims of chance at all, because you're made in the image of God, and the greatest thing is the power of God is in you. The power of God's cosmic energy is our life force, and the consciousness of God as cosmic consciousness in us is our own consciousness. Look about you, you'll see some people, you won't recognize it. They're so attached to matter, they're more like animals. But you will see others who have gathered together the life force, have regulated, corralled it, one pointed it, look at them. Their consciousness on their faces tells you they are children of God. Same consciousness. Delusion is very darkening. Delusion is very engulfing. Such is the power of Satan and delusion. But God's power is greater. And it is God's power which is in us. His great cosmic consciousness is great cosmic energy. And just as in the magnifying glass, the whole power of the sun's rays, its heat, its great energy is behind it, so in us, the whole power of the universe is behind us. The power of God's cosmic consciousness plus His cosmic energy, when we, in following the highest technique of concentration, utilize the lens of the spiritual eye to know what we really are, children of God.